When Shaquille O'Neal walked into the private aviation terminal at DeKalb Peachtree Airport in Atlanta on the morning of a Thursday in late October, the FBO lobby was the particular kind of quiet that expensive places achieve when they are between their reasons for existing. The leather chairs unoccupied, the coffee station freshly restocked, the floor-to-ceiling windows showing a ramp where two aircraft sat in the gray morning light with the patient authority of things that go when they are told and not before. He had come from the hotel on foot, 4 blocks, because the morning was cold enough to be worth feeling and because walking is one of the ways he thinks. He was wearing a dark olive field jacket, the kind with a corduroy collar and brass buttons that had been bought used and had been broken in by someone else before it reached him. Worn jeans, white sneakers with a grass stain on the left toe from a Tuesday in August that had not fully come out in the wash. A navy wool cap pulled low. He carried nothing except his phone, which was in his jacket pocket, and Philip's watch, which was on his wrist. He had chartered a flight. Not for himself. For a group of 14 children from an after-school program in Vine City who had won a STEM competition and whose prize was a trip to a robotics conference in Charlotte and who had never been on a plane. The charter had been arranged 3 weeks earlier through his foundation's operations team, a Cessna Citation CJ3 out of PDK. Wheels up at 9:15. He had come to see them off. He had not told anyone he was coming. He had told the operations team he might stop by, which was the version of his arrival that allowed the morning to be about the children rather than about him. He gave his name at the front desk. The attendant confirmed the charter. She pointed him toward the crew briefing room at the end of the corridor, where the flight crew was conducting the pre-departure check-in with the group chaperones. He walked down the corridor. He noticed 3 things. First, on the wall beside the briefing room door, a framed certificate, the kind that aviation facilities display as a form of institutional autobiography. This one read, DeKalb Peachtree Airport, in recognition of 25 years of service to the Atlanta aviation community, dedicated to the memory of Captain Wendell J. Okafor, 1948 to 2019, whose love of flight he gave to everyone who came within range of it. Below the text, a small black and white photograph of a man in a flight suit, standing beside a propeller aircraft, squinting into a sun that was coming from the left. The man was smiling in the way people smile when they are doing the thing they were made to do. Second, through the briefing room's small rectangular window in the door, he could see the group. 14 children, ages 10 to 13, in matching green t-shirts that said Vine City STEM Scholars on the back. They were seated in 2 rows of folding chairs, and they were doing what children do when they have been told to sit still in a room. Sitting still, imperfectly, with the specific restlessness of people who have somewhere to be and have not yet gotten there. One boy in the front row had his notebook open and was writing something. One girl near the back was pressing her face to the window that looked out onto the ramp, her breath fogging the glass. Third, from inside the briefing room, a voice. Not the chaperone's voice. A voice with a particular quality. Not loud, not cruel in any technical sense, but carrying the kind of casual authority that sometimes accompanies a uniform and a set of wings and the assumption that the room will arrange itself around the person wearing them. The voice was saying something that he could not fully hear through the door. But the word budget was audible, and the word program was audible, and the tone of the 2 words together told him more than the words themselves. He opened the door. Now here is what the voice behind the door did not know, and what the boy in the front row with the open notebook was writing toward, and what a man named Wendell Okafor had said in 1987 to a child in a hangar in Atlanta who had come to look at a plane and had been allowed, for reasons that had nothing to do with money or credentials, to sit in the cockpit. There was a connection between that hangar and this morning, and between the child in the cockpit and a foundation that had grown from a single gift into something that ran in 14 cities, and between the foundation and a charter aircraft on a ramp in the gray October light, and between the aircraft and a boy who had been writing in his notebook since they arrived at the terminal because he processed new rooms the same way he processed new equations, by writing down everything he noticed until the pattern emerged. His name was Elijah. He was 12 years old. He was from Vine City. He had won the STEM competition by designing, on a laptop borrowed from his school's computer lab, a model for a water filtration system that the judges had described in their notes as demonstrating an intuitive grasp of systems thinking that the panel had not expected from a sixth grader. He wanted, with the specific and researched want of someone who has looked into a thing carefully, to study aerospace engineering. He had told no one this except his grandmother, who had said, "Then you'll study aerospace engineering. Stay with us for the entire video, because what happened in that briefing room and on that ramp and in the air between Atlanta and Charlotte on a Thursday morning in October connected a hangar in 1987 to a notebook in the front row, to a pattern that had been accumulating since before Elijah was born." Shaquille O'Neal was born in Newark, New Jersey, on the 6th of March, 1972. And his mother Lucille was 21 years old and had grown up in a city that taught you to read rooms fast because reading them slowly had a cost she could not afford to pay. She had passed this to her son not as instruction, but as practice. She modeled it daily, and he absorbed it the way children absorb the things they see most, which is completely and without choosing to. She had one thing she said about potential, about the impulse to look at a person and decide what they were capable of before they had shown you. She would say, with the directness of someone who had been the subject of that impulse enough times to have developed a precise response to it, "The biggest waste in the world is a person who has been told what they can't do by someone who was never in a position to know." She said it when Shaq was 10 and again when he was 17. And she did not need to say it after that, because it had become the thing he reached for whenever he watched someone being measured by a ceiling that had been installed by someone else. His stepfather, Sergeant Philip Harrison, had grown up in Atlanta, 4 blocks from a church on Kerr Avenue, and 2 blocks from a small municipal airfield that was no longer there, replaced by a shopping development in 1991. But that had been in the years of Philip's childhood and adolescence, a place where a mechanic named Wendell Okafor worked on light aircraft and allowed children from the neighborhood to come and watch if they were quiet and didn't touch anything he hadn't told them they could touch. Philip Harrison had gone there at 11 years old and had watched and had been quiet and had not touched anything. And after 3 visits, Wendell Okafor had looked at him and said, "You have patient eyes. Patient eyes are the first requirement." He had let him sit in the cockpit. He had explained the instruments with the full seriousness of someone who believed that the quality of your explanation was a form of respect for the person being explained to. Philip Harrison had not become a pilot. He had become a soldier, and then a father. And he had carried Wendell Okafor's name and the memory of an instrument panel in the particular way that people carry the things that first showed them the size of the world, not as nostalgia, but as measure. He would say when the occasion warranted it, and sometimes when it did not. "Someone took the time to show me the size of things before I knew to ask for it." That kind of showing is worth more than people know. He had been gone for 9 years. The showing was still happening. What came after the Newark years is architecture by now. The trajectory that moved through Cole High School and LSU and Orlando and Los Angeles and Miami, and 4 championships and 3 MVPs and a television career and a business portfolio in 47 categories and a foundation, structured quietly, that had been running for 9 years in 14 cities with an annual grant program that funded STEM education in underserved communities because his stepfather had told him, in an oblique way, on more than one occasion, that the moment a child understands the size of the world is the moment the world gets slightly larger for everyone. The charter this morning was part of the Foundation's annual prize program. He had funded it. He had not put his name on it. He was here to watch it happen. His name was Captain Todd Mercer. He was 46 years old, with the bearing of someone who had logged enough hours that the cockpit had become an extension of his own dimensions. He moved through aircraft the way certain people move through their own houses, without thinking about the space. He had been flying private charters out of PDK for 11 years, having come from a regional carrier where the scheduling had been relentless, and the compensation had been a conversation he'd had too many times with people who were not listening. Private aviation had given him schedule control and better money and a clientele that he had developed over 11 years. A set of assumptions that were accurate often enough that he had stopped examining them. He had grown up in Marietta, the son of a regional sales manager who had moved the family 3 times before Todd was 12, which had produced in him an acute sensitivity to the social topography of any new room, and a corresponding habit of rapid categorical placement. Not because he was unkind, but because a boy who had been new in 3 schools before adolescence learns to read a room's hierarchy fast and position himself within it with minimal friction. And that habit, laid down at 10 years old, had never been examined or revised. He had been told this morning's charter was for a youth STEM program. He had not been told the details of the funding. He had arrived at the briefing room to conduct the standard pre-departure orientation and had found 14 children in green t-shirts who were, in his assessment, more energetic than his usual passengers and less familiar with the protocols. And he had begun the briefing in a tone that was not condescending technically, but compressed, reduced. The version of the explanation you give when you have already decided how much of it will be absorbed. He had said, to the chaperones, while gesturing vaguely toward the children, "This is a courtesy charter, so we'll be keeping things simple." He had said, "Budget programs get the same plane, just a shorter briefing." He had said it with the ease of someone who does not hear what they are saying, because they are not listening to themselves from the outside. He was mid-sentence when the door opened. He looked at the man in the olive field jacket and the navy cap and the grass-stained sneakers, and he completed his sentence. The word accommodate and the word group size. And then he said, without adjusting his tone, "Sir, this is a closed crew briefing." "Are you with the chaperones?" Shaq said. "I'm with the children." "Are you listed on the manifest?" "I'm not flying," Shaq said. "I came to see them off." He looked at the 14 children in the green shirts. He looked at the boy in the front row with the notebook. He looked at the girl fogging the window with her breath. He looked back at the captain. "Please finish your briefing." Mercer looked at him. Something in the quality of the man's stillness, the complete, unhurried stillness of someone who was not asking permission for his presence and was not explaining it and was not going to, produced in Mercer a brief interruption in his categorization mechanism. He finished the briefing. He distributed the laminated safety cards. He told the children they would have a clear run up to Charlotte and that the flight would take approximately 55 minutes and that they were welcome to look out the windows on ascent because the view of Atlanta from that angle was something worth seeing. He said it differently than he had been saying things before the door opened. He was not sure why. He went to the cockpit. At the front desk, the attendant had been doing something since the man in the olive jacket had walked down the corridor. She had pulled up the charter documentation, standard procedure when a non-manifest visitor was on the premises, and she had read, in the ownership and billing section, the name of the entity that had arranged the charter and was responsible for the aircraft and the crew contract. She picked up her phone and she called the crew scheduling number and she asked, in the careful voice of someone who is about to say something that will rearrange the morning for the person receiving it. Did anyone brief Captain Mercer on the ownership structure for this morning's charter? There was a pause on the line. She said, "I think someone needs to." From the briefing room, the children were being led out to the ramp by the chaperones. Shaq walked with them. The girl who had been fogging the window walked beside him, without appearing to notice she was doing it, the way children attach to a presence without announcing the attachment. She said, "Are you coming with us?" "Not today," he said. "Have you been to Charlotte?" "Many times." "What's it like?" "Bigger than you expect," he said. "And there's a museum downtown that has a real Apollo lunar module, not a replica, the actual one." She looked at him. "The actual one?" "Actual one," he said. "Go see it if you get time." She said, "Okay." She said it with the full, uncomplicated intention of someone who has just added an item to a list that she fully intends to complete. The boy in the front row, Elijah, had stayed close since they left the briefing room. He had his notebook open and was writing while he walked, which was a form of locomotion that required a specific kind of coordination and that he had apparently mastered. He said, without looking up, "Who funded this trip?" Shaq said, "A foundation." "Which one?" "One that thinks you should go to the robotics conference." Elijah looked up. He looked at the man beside him, the field jacket, the navy cap, Philip's watch on the left wrist, and he did the calculation that 12-year-olds who process the world through pattern recognition sometimes do very fast. He said, "Are you the foundation?" Shaq said, "What are you writing in the notebook?" Elijah looked at it. He said, "Everything I notice. When I'm somewhere new, I write down what I notice until I can see the pattern." "What's the pattern this morning?" Elijah looked at the ramp, at the aircraft, at the two pilots visible through the cockpit windscreen running through the pre-flight checklist, at the gray October sky beginning to lighten at the edges. He said, "That someone arranged all of this very carefully. The plane, the timing, the conference. All of it is connected and it points in one direction." He looked at Shaq, toward us. Shaq said, "What does that tell you?" Elijah said, "That someone believes this matters." Not in a general way, specifically. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "That's the pattern." In the cockpit, Captain Mercer had received a call from crew scheduling. The call had taken 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, he had learned the ownership structure of the charter. He had learned the name of the entity. He had learned from the scheduling coordinator who had looked it up at the attendant's request that the entity was associated with a personal trust, that the trust was associated with a foundation, and that the foundation's annual program grant for STEM education had funded this charter and 14 others like it in the current year alone, and that the person who had walked into the briefing room in the olive jacket and the grass-stained sneakers and stood at the back of the room and said, "Please finish your briefing," was the reason the aircraft existed in the context of this morning at all. He sat in the cockpit for a moment. He thought about the word budget. He thought about the words courtesy charter. He thought about the tone, compressed, reduced, that he had used in the briefing and the specific reason he had used it and whether the reason held up now that he was examining it. It did not. He unstrapped. He got up. He went back through the cabin, down the air stairs, and onto the ramp. Shaq was standing near the nose of the aircraft, watching the children board. 14 children in green shirts, single file, each one pausing at the top of the air stairs to look back at Atlanta before going in. Because you look back at the place you are leaving from, when it is the first time you have ever left it this way. Mercer walked up. He stopped 2 feet away. He said, Mr. O'Neill. Shaq turned. Mercer said, I was told who you are, and I want you to know that is not why I'm out here. He said it carefully, with the specificity of someone who has decided to be precise, because imprecision would make the thing he is trying to say into something it isn't. I'm out here because of what I said in the briefing room. The way I said it, I used a word, budget, as though it meant something about the value of the people in the room. And it doesn't. These children are on a plane that was chartered specifically for them by someone who thinks their work matters. And I briefed them like they were an inconvenience. He stopped. That was wrong. I want to say so to you because you were the one who heard it. Shaq looked at him for a moment. He said, You want to say it to the right person? Yes. Then say it to them. He nodded toward the aircraft. The last child, the girl who had asked about Charlotte, was at the top of the air stairs. You've got 55 minutes up to Charlotte. That's enough time to give them the real briefing. Mercer looked at the aircraft. He looked at Shaq. He said, What does that mean? It means, tell them what you know. Not the laminated card version. What you actually know about flying. About what it took to learn it. About what it looks like from up there. No, he paused. Someone did that for my stepfather once, in a hangar in Atlanta. He talked about it for the rest of his life. Mercer said, Who? Shaq looked at the certificate on the wall of the terminal building, visible through the floor-to-ceiling glass. The black and white photograph. The man squinting into the light from the left, he said, Wendell Okafor. Mercer went still. He said, Captain Okafor taught the ground school certification course at PDK for 20 years. I got my commercial license through that program. A pause. He died 3 years ago. Shaq said, I know. They looked at each other across a ramp in Atlanta on a gray October morning, and the thing between them was not the gift and not the briefing and not the charter. It was a man who had spent 20 years teaching people to fly because he believed the sky was not a privilege and the knowledge of how to reach it was not something you kept to yourself. Mercer said, I'll give them the real briefing. He went back up the air stairs. What happened in the 55 minutes between Atlanta and Charlotte was not recorded and not photographed and was not put in any report that went back to any foundation or any board. But 14 children arrived in Charlotte having heard from a man who had logged thousands of hours and who had given them the version of himself that did not compress or reduce, what it meant to learn to read an instrument panel, what it meant to trust a skill you had built hour by hour until it became reflex, what the view of Atlanta looked like at 8,000 feet on a clear morning when the city spread out below you and you could see, if you looked carefully, the neighborhoods you had come from and the distance you had traveled and the fact that both of those things were true at the same time. Elijah wrote all of it in the notebook. He also wrote, at the top of the page in slightly larger letters, because he had figured out the pattern and wanted to mark the moment. Someone arranged all of this. It points toward us. Philip Harrison had said, someone took the time to show me the size of things before I knew to ask for it. That kind of showing is worth more than people know. He had said it about a man in a hangar who had looked at a boy with patient eyes and decided the boy deserved the full explanation. The full explanation had traveled from Wendell Okafor to Philip Harrison to a foundation structured quietly in 14 cities, to a charter aircraft on a ramp in Atlanta, to a 55-minute flight in which a pilot who had said the wrong thing went back and said the right one. The boy in the front row wrote it all down. He was 12 years old. He wanted to study aerospace engineering. His grandmother had said, "Then you'll study aerospace engineering." She was correct. She was also, though she did not know it, quoting an operating principle that had been running since 1987 in a hangar 2 blocks from where she had raised her daughter, which was 1 block from where her grandson had been born, which was in the neighborhood the foundation had chosen, because the data said it had the highest concentration of children whose ceilings had been installed by people who were never in a position to know. The biggest waste in the world is a person who has been told what they can't do by someone who was never in a position to know. Lucille O'Neill had said that. She had said it once to a 10-year-old and once to a 17-year-old, and then she had not needed to say it anymore. It arrived in Charlotte on a Thursday morning in October at approximately 10:17 a.m. And it arrived in a notebook and on an instrument panel, and in the particular way that the sky looks when you are in it for the first time, and someone has taken the time to show you the size of things. Captain Todd Mercer submitted the following week a request to join the volunteer roster for the Foundation's annual Aviation Day program, which brought children from after-school programs to PDK each spring to tour the terminal and meet working pilots. He was accepted. He came the first spring and every spring after that. He gave each time the real briefing. A girl who fogged the window with her breath went to the museum in downtown Charlotte and stood in front of an actual Apollo lunar module, not a replica, the actual one, and stood there for 11 minutes without moving, which her chaperone timed because she was the kind of chaperone who paid attention to the moments that were doing something to the children in her care. She did not say anything when she finally stepped back. She wrote something in the margin of the conference program. Her chaperone later asked what it said. She said, "Bigger than I expected." She had been told it would be. And a 12-year-old named Elijah sat in the front row of a Cessna Citation CJ-3 at 8,000 feet above Georgia and looked out the window at the city he had come from, spread below him in the October morning light, and wrote in his notebook the thing that would appear 16 years later in the acknowledgments section of a doctoral dissertation in aerospace engineering from a university in California, not quoted, not cited, but present in the phrasing of a sentence that said, "To the people who arranged things carefully and pointed them in my direction before I knew what direction I was going." He had known. He had written it down. Someone believed this matters, not in a general way. Specifically, he always had. He always would. Drop a comment right now and tell us, who showed you the size of things before you knew to ask for it? Because this community carries those people, and we want to know who yours is. If this one reached somewhere you were not ready to reach, tap the like button for every child who looked out a window and saw something bigger than they expected. Subscribe if this is your first time here, because we build every story to stay with you, and the next one is already on its way. We will see you there.